All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the October 27th, 2023 California Board of Behavioral Sciences Policy and Advocacy Committee meeting. My name is Chris Jones. I'm chairperson of the committee. Before we convene, I would like to remind everyone present that the board is a consumer protection agency charged with administering and enforcing the board's laws. Where protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount. I will announce when we're accepting public comment on the various issues, and the meeting moderator will open the lines as appropriate. Each commentator will have 2 minutes to comment. Moderator, would you please provide the audience instructions on how they may participate during the meeting at the appropriate times?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we get started, I would like to remind committee members and senior staff who are not speaking to mute their microphones. If I detect background noise during the meeting as a result of unmuted microphones, I will interject with a brief friendly reminder or simply mute the microphones. To facilitate public comment, we will be utilizing the WebEx question and answer feature, also referred to as the Q&A panel. When the chair reaches a point in the agenda at which public comment is appropriate, public comment will be requested. At the chair's direction, I will turn on and announce the opening of the Q&A feature. It is not necessary to identify yourself in order to make public comment. I will take comments in the order they are received. I will give the member of the public the ability to unmute themselves. The member of the public will have 2 minutes to make their comments. I will provide a 15-second warning, and at the conclusion, the microphone will be muted and we will move on to the next member of the public who has a comment. Please note that the Q&A feature is only being used as a means for members of the public to represent that they would like to make a verbal comment. Once given permission to unmute, the member of the public may unmute themselves and verbally state their comment. The Q&A feature is not to be used for typing out questions or for committee members to communicate with one another. And with that, I return the floor back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, moderator. I would now like to call the meeting to order and ask Christina to call roll to establish a quorum.
Good afternoon. Chris Jones?
Here.
John Sovek?
Here.
Wendy Stratt?
Here, public member.
And for the record, Abigail Ortega is absent. And I'd like to remind all members to keep your video on during the duration of the meeting, and we have a quorum.
All right, thank you, Christina. Board staff, would you please introduce yourselves?
Start out, Steve Sodergren, Board Executive Officer.
Marlon McManus, Assistant Executive Officer for the BBS.
And I'm Roseanne Helms, Legislative Manager for the board.
Christina Kitamura, Administrative Analyst for the board.
Sabina Knight, Legal Counsel for the board.
Christy Shields, Regulations Counsel for the board.
I think that's everyone.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. Now it's time for the public to introduce themselves if they would like. This is voluntary. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to introduce themselves?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if any member of the public would like to introduce themselves, you may raise your hand or you may type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. We'll give you a moment. All right, I see no request for people to introduce themselves. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, next item on the agenda is our discussion and possible approval of the July 21st, 2023 committee meeting minutes. Does any member wish to remove or edit any items from the consent calendar? No? All right, can I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Motion to approve the July 21st, 2023 committee meeting minutes.
John Sovek, second.
Thank you. Are there any comments from the public?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on this agenda item, please either raise your hand or type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. We'll give you a moment. All right, this is a moderator. I see no request for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Christina, can you please take the vote?
Chris Jones,
Abstain?
John Sobek,
Yes.
Wendy Strack,
Yes.
motion carries.
Thank you, Christina. All right, next on our agenda is item number 4. Is the discussion and possible recommendation regarding a required display of license or registration. Roseanne, would you please provide us with an overview?
Yeah, so I wanted to bring back an item that we have been discussing in our telehealth and in this committee. We've kind of done some refining on it. So right now, all licensees and registrants of the board receive a paper copy of their license or registration when they become licensed or registered. The copy contains the person's name, their license number, the type of license, and the expiration date. And the law requires them to display this piece of paper, their license or registration, in a conspicuous place in their primary place of practice. And that's in the actual Business and Professions Code. So they're required by statute to do this. The law was likely written this way to ensure that a client could see that their therapist actually had a license or registration when they were in their office for an appointment. However, the increased use of telehealth raises the question of whether we need to consider updating this law. Some therapists' primary place of practice may be virtual, or they might be seeing clients over the telephone. So that would make it really difficult to impossible to physically display the paper copy of the license or registration. Right now, we don't really have a corresponding requirement that all licensees or registrants have to provide a license or registration number when they begin services with the client. It's kind of inconsistent throughout the law. MFT associates are an exception to this. They have to provide their license number plus some other additional information for Business and Professions Code section 4980.44. All other licensees or registrants are only required to provide this when they initiate telehealth services with a client. So they are required to, when they begin telehealth, provide the license or registration number. Also, the law in regulation section 1811 requires all licensees and registrants to include their license or registration number in advertisements. But it just kind of seems like the law might need some cleanup in some places to become a little bit more consistent. We discussed this issue at the telehealth committee. We drafted some language. We had kind of gone in the direction of thinking, maybe they should provide the license and registration number, type, and expiration date physically or verbally each time services are provided. However, after some debate and discussion, when we reviewed that draft language in committee, there was some concern that providing this information at each session could become overly burdensome at the appointment. So in the July meeting, this committee directed staff to look into a solution that would incorporate providing the license or registration number, type, and expiration date in the required written notice to consumers that they must be providing each client prior to initiating psychotherapy services. So the latest proposal is shown in attachment A, and what it does is it would strike the requirement to actually physically display the license or registration anywhere, and instead at the beginning of therapy, beginning on and after July 1, 2025, we have to have a start date. Then in the required notice to consumers, the person would need to provide their license or a registration number, expiration date. And then because this notice is only required one time, we also included some language stating that the licensee or registrant shall inform their clients of any change to the active status of their license or registration. So the language is there for you to review in attachment A, and I'll open it up for discussion now.
All right, thank you, Roseanne. Are there any comments from our esteemed committee members?
I think it looks good. I think it's clear. I think it addresses the practicalities of providing services both online and in person. So I think it's a step in the right direction.
I would agree. It seems like a pretty clear, straightforward way, easy to comply method for adapting to kind of how service delivery has changed.
I agree also. It looks pretty straightforward. Nice job, Roseanne. Thank you for that work. Do we have any comments from the public?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm opening up the Q&A panel, and if any member of the public would like to comment on this agenda item, you may raise your hand or type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. We are displaying instructions, and we'll give you a moment. All right, we have a request for comment from Rebecca Gonzalez. And Rebecca, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Rebecca Gonzalez with the National Association of Social Workers California chapter. I just want to concur that this is a good solution to this issue, and thank you for your work on this, Roseanne.
Thanks, Rebecca.
All right, I see no further requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So we would be looking at a possible motion. Roseanne, would this be to bring back to the full board for discussion?
Yeah, it would be to, the motion would be to direct staff to make any non-substantive changes and bring to the board for consideration as a legislative proposal.
Okay, do we have a motion? John, you're muted.
Good thing I was muted. I'd like to make that motion as suggested by Roseanne Helms. Christina, does that give you the language you need?
I have the language.
Thank you.
And I'll second that motion. We feel back for comment now, don't we? It's been a minute since I've run a meeting. I apologize. All right, any further comments from our board? From our committee? Any further comments from the public?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm opening up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen or raise your hand. All right, I see no request for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Christina,
I'll
would you
take
mind
the vote.
taking? Yeah, thank you.
Chris Jones,
Yes.
John Sovett,
Yes.
Wendy Stratt,
Yes.
motion carries.
All right, thank you, Christina. Next on our agenda is item number 5, discussion and possible recommendations regarding advertising statutes and regulations. Roseanne, would you please provide us with an overview?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So this touches on a topic that we've been kind of stepping toward reviewing for a while. We started by just looking at our advertising regs at a meeting, but really our advertising laws are kind of sprinkled throughout statutes and regulations. And so we wanted to do a little bit more of a comprehensive review and kind of look at other states and look at how video conferencing is playing into that. So to make this as simple as possible, I've kind of identified 5 little discussion areas within advertising that I want to touch on today. And this is meant to be just a kind of a kickoff discussion on what direction we want to go. So I'm gonna, I think if that's okay with you, Chris, I'm gonna stop after each little topic area and we can discuss and then move on to the next one.
Yeah, that's great, thanks. We'll do that.
Okay. So the board sets requirements for advertising for its license and regulations mainly via its advertising regulations. That's the most direct requirements. And that's found in section 1811 of the California Code of Regulations. And I've shown that in attachment A. The last significant changes to the advertising regulations were made in 2013. In addition to the board's advertising regulations, all healing arts boards under DCA are subject to Business and Professions Code section 651. And that particular section prohibits false or misleading advertising. And it contains a definition of a public communication for purposes of advertising And that includes everything from mail, television, radio, down to the internet websites or electronic communications that somebody might use for advertising. And that section also contains a definition of a false, fraudulent, misleading, or deceptive claim of advertising. So 651 is not specifically the board statute. It's a statute that sort of belongs to all healing arts boards. It covers a lot of broader topics related to advertising. The board also has a statute in each License Practice Act, there's 4 of them, that specifically defines advertising for purposes of Section 651. And then finally, we have just in our MFT law, we have Business and Professions Code Section 4980.44 and 4980.48 that contain client disclosure requirements and advertising requirements that are specific only to MFT associates and trainees, respectively. So they give MFT associates and trainees a little bit different requirements than everybody else. So I've included all of those sections for reference in attachment B so you can take a look at them, but comprehensively together, kind of scattered throughout our laws, these are what make up our advertising laws. On our website, we also provide an advertising requirement fact sheet that's just basically an informational sheet that we've put together that explains the board's advertising laws, and it provides examples in the forms of business cards, sort of what it would look like, what acceptable advertising would look like, so that people can use that as examples. So the Policy and Advocacy Committee last discussed this topic last year, and it directed staff to further look into modernizing the board's advertising laws. And so we've gone back and we've done a more comprehensive review rather than just looking at Section 1811. And I've kind of grouped this into 5 categories. We took a look at the advertising laws of some of the other DCA boards comparable to this one, and also other states, similar state licensing boards. We're going to discuss just our advertising regulations in Section 1811, our statute that's specific to MFT associates, and our statute that's specific to MFT trainees, and our statute our statute for LPCCs that contains the advertising definition that's a little bit different than all the other advertising definitions. So we kind of want to do sort of a little comprehensive cleanup and try to get these to work as smoothly together as possible and have them as in one place as much as possible. So first I want to discuss my review of advertising laws at other DCA boards and other states. We just kind of wanted to take a look and see if we need any modernization. How do our regulations and laws regarding advertising stack up to others? How do we address electronic communications, for example, that have become so much more common, like the use of YouTube or TikTok or increased internet advertising? So we took a look at that, and also the Association of Social Work Boards was able to provide us a really nice compilation of advertising laws of social work boards. Sometimes they're composite boards, sometimes they're not, in other states. So they put together a really great analysis, which is shown in the attachments as well. But in terms of other DCA boards, the Board of Psychology is probably the most similar to us in terms of the scope of practice of the profession. Their advertising regs are pretty simple in that they pretty much have to have their license number in any advertising, and then they have the kind of the 651 requirements that you can't do anything that's false or misleading. It has to be in their scope of competence, but there's not really a comprehensive requirement like Section 1811 that we have that says you need to use this title and these letters, and here's what you can or can't say. So that's what we found with psychology. We also reviewed acupuncture board, physical therapy board, chiropractic board, and they were all pretty much somewhat similar to psychology board. They prohibit false and misleading advertising pursuant to Business and Professions Code 651, which applies to all healing arts. But they don't go into as much detail as our advertising regs do regarding the components of what an advertisement may or may not contain. So we're pretty ahead of the game in terms of being really specific, providing some good guidelines of you can use these abbreviations in terms of what else is out there. One thing that I just found interesting about demo boards advertising regulations is they actually go as far as defining what is not considered an advertisement in their regs. They say that advertising does not include any printing on buildings, uniforms, badges, or any writing on memoranda or other communication for the sole purpose of other than promoting a practice. So I thought that was interesting. Don't know that we necessarily want to go there. It could lead to possibly being confusing in other areas, but just kind of wanted to throw that out there because it was really one of the main differences, one main unique thing that I found that they do that we don't. In terms of other states, like I said, attachment D provides a great overview that ASWB was nice enough to put together for us. Most states are similar in nature to California in that they have something like BPC section 651 that prohibits advertising from being fraudulent, misleading, or misrepresenting. Not a lot of examples of anybody that goes into as great a detail as we do. Not seeing any examples of anybody talking about electronic videos or TikTok or anything like that. Just sort of some general guidelines of, don't be fraudulent and misleading. Kind of some noteworthy things that I found. Minnesota and Florida both outline the titles that must be used in advertisements, similar to what we do. Texas law goes as far to specify that the titles used in advertisements must contain the person's license designation and any specialty recognition. But that's pretty much on par. There's really, everybody's pretty much kind of 651 sort of level of don't be false and misleading. Maybe here's some titles you can use, and that's pretty much it. So I'm going to stop here to see if anybody has any comments on that, and then we'll go on and dive into our actual statutes and regulations.
Comments? John?
So, I mean, it looks pretty thorough, and it looks like because of that initial definition of all the places we might be advertising, that a lot of stuff is going to be covered by this. Because I think our biggest concern is are our regs and rules going to actually connect with what's happening out in the world right now? The one thing you did mention that is kind of like, I don't know how we monitor that, except once again, go under the generalization of, oh, that's fraudulent, is a lot of the TikTok therapy that's going on these days. So that would probably be caught under potentially fraudulent rather than, any misadvertising. But I think that's where a lot of the current concerns came down. Since 2013, the world has changed dramatically, especially with online marketing. And it sounds like the core of our rules will cover that. It's going to be how to now bring the nuance of implementation out into the real world.
Agree. Very well said. Thank you, Mr. Silva. If there's no more comments, we can move on.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, kind of going on what John says, we kind of have that kind of lays out the basic and how it's done in other states. And now I want to really dig into specific statutes that we may or may not want to make amendments to. So the first one I want to touch on is our advertising regulations. And I've shown that in attachment A with a few proposed amendments, just that sort of, they're all relatively minor right now, just sort of some proposed amendments to make some updates. And then we can discuss further whether any other changes are desired. We need to delete references to MFT referral services. The board stopped quite some time ago registering MFT referral services. We don't even have that authority in our statute anymore. So that definitely needs to go. We had feedback from NASW California that nobody in their profession really refers to themselves as a CSW. It's usually a associate clinical social worker or ASW. So we are just proposing to delete the registered associate CSW. That's not a commonly used phrase. You'll see some edits to replace gendered pronouns with gender neutral pronouns. And then you'll see toward the end, a amendment that's clarifying whether the use of a nickname or pseudonym is allowed in advertisements. And this was based on feedback that from stakeholders that they wanted to discuss this. It could be a little bit problematic in terms of a public protection standpoint, so I would like to discuss it further. whether or not that language is needed or desired, but we wanted to have the discussion, so I did place potential language in there. So I think I'll open it up now to discuss the advertising regulations that you see in attachment A, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, the nickname one was the one that caught my attention the most, I think. And I'm comfortable with having the nickname or the pseudonym in there as long as the legal registered name is also there, so there's not confusion. I think that makes sense.
Okay.
Any other
I have a
comments?
slightly different take on that. I think the use of nickname could be lovely. Pseudonym I might take out, and I might also consider removing the name alternate name in advertisement. Because a nickname to me, and then so it's John Sparky Sovak, okay? But my full name, John Sovak, is on board is fine, versus Aaron Thomas and my alternate name, and then you'd have to research to find out what my full name is on the board, on Breeze and stuff like that, and how would you do that? And so I think the alternate name thing does raise some orange flags for me. Not bright red ones, but kind of orange flags for me.
Okay. So John, you would have it say use of a nickname in an advertisement is permitted as long as the full name is filed with the board is also included.
Yeah, I think that tightens it up a little bit and takes away some places where people could sneak in and maybe get themselves in trouble.
Okay, I like that. I think that's a good point.
And now you're on to call me John Sparky Sovak. I know it. From now on, I'm in trouble.
Oh yeah, that's happening. Wendy, do you have any comments?
No, I think the suggested approach addresses the issue, but I am looking forward to what Sparky has to say next. So.
All right, Roseanne, I think we can move on.
This is regulatory counsel for the board. I did want to make one comment if the chair is okay with that.
Yes, please go ahead, Christy.
Okay, so through the chair, I think Ms. Knight and I kind of struggled with this item because I think the concerns Mr. Sovak was raising are valid. I did think, however, the board might want to consider allowing aliases that are current or former legal names, because sometimes people get married, but they still want to use their maiden name in practice because that's how their patients know them. And I thought that would be okay because it's not misleading. It was who they were formerly. They changed their name legally to something else, but it's still a former legal name. And I know that when we do enforcement actions, we put aliases or AKAs in the notice or accusation that we serve people with, because some people do continue to use their former legal name. It is derivative of their identity, so I don't think it's misleading if you have the currently registered full legal name on the advertisement alongside it, but just something to consider because I know the State Bar allows that. I think you're right, though, going any farther than that is a concern. It would be misleading to the public. It could invite fraud, and that's what, for purposes of the First Amendment, that the board has kind of a jurisdiction to regulate, is false and misleading advertising, things that tend to mislead the public. The board is free to regulate. So unless Ms. Knight has any other ideas, that's kind of what I was thinking in terms of an alternate name option would be an alias that includes current or former legally assigned or legal names, either one.
Right. This is Sabina. I agree. I know we kind of talked a little bit about offline yesterday about this, but it's difficult without crossing over into that misleading, area for advertising. So I'm in agreement.
Christy, would the wording be, would it be use of a nickname, or would we just want to say former legal name, or would we want to use the alias term?
Maybe current or former legal name would be more precise, so that people know what we mean by alias, because alias can include fake names too.
Yeah, that was my
whatever name they use that's not truly them. It's another identity they've assumed, and it would be misleading. The public wouldn't be able to find their name on our website. They would be confused by the two names. At least a current or former legal name was their former legal identity, and it is linked to them in our database probably, so that's what I was kind of thinking, unless Ms. Knight has some better wording.
No, I agree. I was thinking the same thing about aliases, and I went into like movie land. So yeah,
one question, one more question. Wouldn't the current
a former legal name? Sorry, former legal name.
The current legal name would be what's filed with the board right now, correct?
Yeah.
So
correct.
Use of a nickname
former legal name.
In an advertisement is permitted. Okay. Got it.
So it's a name, a former legal name used by the licensee. So
used by the
licensee's use of a nickname or a former legal name in an advertisement is permitted as long as the full name as filed with the board is also included in the, I don't know if we want to say same advertisement or in that advertisement. Something like that.
Advertisement. Okay.
Does that sound right, Sabina?
So let me read it back. The licensee's use of a nickname in an advertisement is permitted as long as the full name as filed with the board is also included in that advertisement.
So I think I was saying licensee's use of a nickname or a former legal name in an advertisement is permitted as long as the full, I don't know if you want to say current full name, but full name as filed with the board is, I think is good, is also included in that advertisement.
Okay, perfect. Got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Unless Sabina wants to tweak it and she thinks there's something else to add.
I'm in agreement. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'll play.
Go for it.
Should the permitted as long as it's the full current legal name actually be that second part?
Well, that's what I was saying, but I thought maybe as filed with the board is the
filed with the board has to be what's on their basically on their driver's license is what we use for that. So
okay,
whatever they're using for the driver's license is considered our board filed name. So I think we want to keep the name as filed with the board.
Okay.
They can't vary too much from there, although they may, driver's license has to be basically based off a court order or
yeah, the social security number, the DMV requires now that you match your social security number. You have to give them a copy of you have to give you their actual card, social security card, and certification from the Social Security Administration that name is linked to your social security number. And then you have to submit it to them. They have to say, yes, we've seen it. They give it back to you, and then they correct it in the DMV database. Yeah, I know because I've been through it.
I know, and I know that in my past, when you change your name, DMV when it's
and so
new ID.
On your driver's license is what the Social Security Administration has for you, supposedly. That's the process.
Okay. John.
And I guess that's what the board uses to validate, correct?
Yes.
The identity.
Yes.
Okay.
Is you okay? Perfect. All right, thank you. All right, Roseanne, next point.
Okay. So moving on, so that's one piece of our advertising law. And then want to discuss a little bit what the law says for MFT associates it's a little bit different from what our advertising regulations say. So we have a section 4980.44, and it actually, that has two pieces. So I'm going to veer off of advertising a little bit because it's included but related. So 4980.44A is what I want to focus on first. That particular piece requires MFT associates to inform each client that they are an unlicensed registrant, provide their registration number, name of employer, and indicate what type of licensee is supervising them. So, and I've included the wording of the statute here in the memo, and also it's in the attachments. But basically, there's some really detailed information. They have to state who they are being supervised by, what license type that person has. In contrast, ASWs and APCCs don't have those same requirements. ASWs have to inform each client that they're unlicensed and under the supervision of a licensed professional. APCCs have to inform each client that they are unlicensed and under supervision. They don't even have to say it's under a licensed professional. So if we're going to be amending these sections, which relate to advertising anyways, it would be nice if the requirements were consistent across the license types. And I wanted to point out something else here, in that they should, in being consistent, not include just MFT associates, but also we should be using all applicants and registrants to account for people like 90-day rule applicants. So they should have to say something like, I am an unlicensed individual. I'm under the supervision of a licensed professional. I don't know if we want to go as far as saying which particular license it is. I don't know if that matters or not. We can discuss. So that's one point that I wanted to make. That's 4980.44A. This is where it kind of ties back into advertising. 4980.44B goes on to specify additional information that must be contained in an MFT associate's advertisement. It says that the person has to say that a person is a registrant, their registration number, the name of the employer, and that they're supervised by a licensed person. And so every requirement that's in 4980.44B is already contained in the advertising regulations, except for one, and that's the requirement that they disclose in the advertisement that they're supervised by a licensed person. So therefore, what I recommend is that 4980.44B be struck in its entirety, and the committee should discuss the one difference, whether or not it's necessary for associates to disclose that they're supervised by a licensed person. If the committee decides that it should be disclosed, it should be added to 1811, so it applies to all types of registrants, not just AMFTs. It's really confusing right now to try to explain advertising regulations for somebody based on whether they're an AMFT or an APCC or something else, because the requirements are not the same. And there's no really rhyme or reason why that needs to be that way. So I want to open it up for discussion of 4980.44.
I'll bite. Sparky here. Actually, John Sovek for the record. So for me, I do like the depth that 44A goes into actually describing how it needs to happen. And if there was a way to actually beef up the ASW and APCCs, I think that makes more sense to me personally than doing the reverse and drawing down the associate, the AMFT thing. I just think that specificity helps a lot. The other thing, just to be clear, in getting rid of B, is that what we're just trying to do is clear up the language, make it a little bit easier to move through, but that in advertising, they will still need to disclose that they are under supervision. And that would happen with the other section, which I don't remember, 1811, I think you said.
So yes, 1811 requires, let me pull it up here really quick. They have to say that they're, bear with me just 1 second. They have to say that they're under supervision. Well, that's the one thing that's missing, is that they don't have to say that they're supervised by a licensed person. So if we want them to say that they're supervised by a licensed person, I recommend that we put, instead of having that in just MFT law, we place it in the advertising regulations and make it true for all associates.
And I agree with that, but I think for a public safety point of view, they need to understand that there is a licensed person in this process, and that license supervision model includes discussion of their client information. It includes the supervisor stepping in if there are challenges or issues. So I think it is important for that to be part of, I think, 1811, to make sure that it's there and that it's for all types of registrants. Because I think for a public safety, they need to understand this is how the model works, even though no one's going to read this but us, but you know what I mean, you know?
I do, yeah.
So it's clarified.
Yeah, because the 1811, it makes them disclose that they're the name of their employer, but it's silent on the supervisor. And I think that you're right. It is, the supervisor is going to be seeing the records too. So
And actually, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, or someone who might know better, those records are actually property of the supervisor and not the associate or the agencies. Anybody remember this obscure piece of information?
I believe it depends on the policies of the agency. I mean,
Yeah.
it depends on if it's an agency or a private practice. It would be just the supervisor might be just, but if there's an agency involved, I know that different agencies have different policies.
Because at the time when I was going, back in the old days, is that all of the records that I had with my supervisor while I was with them stayed with them, and I started new files as I became a licensed person. So that, once again, why it's important that people understand that we're under supervision, to understand where, like you say, those records may or may not be.
Yeah, because we do require that the supervisor has to be able to access the records.
I also agree that I like the consistency across the different licenses. I do think it's important also that, you know, there is indication that there's a licensed person supervising. To John's point, we may be the only ones that read it, but I think that uniformity is important for you know, just to make sure that we're maintaining proper practice as we're doing supervision too. So following those guidelines is, I think, a good idea. Wendy, any thoughts? Okay, perfect. All right, Roseanne, Christy, I see your hand up.
So my question was, based on your discussion, are you suggesting amending 1811B to add the words "and supervisor"? So it would read, registrants must include the name of their employer and supervisor in an advertisement. Is that what you're talking about doing here, or?
I think that we would, well, and I haven't, that's up for debate too. I would probably draft something and bring it back, but I think that.
Okay, good. I just wasn't sure. I wasn't, okay.
I would say maybe registrants must include that they must state that they are under supervision in an advertisement. I don't know if we want to go as far as stating the type of the license of the supervisor or not. That's a good question, because right now LMFT law does. We want to say that it's, you know, the license type of the supervisor. I think that it does get into number of characters. So one of the things that MFT stakeholders have brought up before for theirs right now is that it's a lot to put if you're working with a small space like a business card or an Instagram handle. You know, stating your supervisor's name and their license type and your employer's name is a lot of characters, and sometimes characters are limited. So there's kind of those two things to weigh.
Yeah, so I think you might be on the right track of saying that say that they're under supervision, because my concern would be 651 says that if they're naming a person in advertising that's licensed by the board, they have to disclose everything in A1 through 3. So that would, you know, be the licensee's name, the supervisor's name, their license number, and their title. So that would be the problem you're talking about, the character issue, and maybe just enough to be completely transparent and not misleading to the consumer. You can simply say that that person's practicing under supervision. And I don't know, I mean, that would be a kind of a compromise, but the board could always choose to say, no, you're gonna have to say they're supervised by this person, name, license number, title. So it's really up to the board, but I mean, those are the kind of maybe the options to consider in drafting. So.
And my thought today, I mean, we're not approving any language today. What I'll do is I'll be drafting this and it'll be coming back to this committee again.
Okay, I guess I was just trying to see if we could make sure we knew what direction the committee wanted to go, so we could have better language when we brought it back. We wouldn't have to tweak it so much the next time. But I mean, if the committee has any thoughts about like which option you'd like us to go down in terms of drafting, this would be helpful to know at this time.
Can I interject too on that? I like that under supervision, because you do have multiple supervisors during your pathway. And so, I mean, having to update all your advertising might be tricky. So I think that's probably a good opinion, a good route, in my opinion.
I'm okay with just saying that's a supervised, a licensed supervisor. I think that there's other ways that then you can identify the supervisor, like through consent forms and things like that, that would satisfy and give the consumer, the means of identifying who that supervisor is, should they ever need to have contact with them. Any other thoughts? Okay. All right. Thanks, Roseanne. Do you have enough to go on?
I do for that one, yes.
Perfect. All right.
Okay. Moving on to section 4980.48. So we're going to basically do the same thing again here, but for trainees. Talking about 4980.48A first. That requires that MFT trainees inform each client that they are an unlicensed trainee, provide the name of their employer, and indicate what type of licensee is supervising them. It's much more detailed than the requirements for the other two license types, and I've shown those here. There's one nuance that we need to be careful of, though, when making this the same for anything. If we're going to say that they're supervised by a licensed person and potentially what license type, there is no specific requirement for social work interns and PCC trainees to necessarily be supervised by a licensed person. Typically they are, but they're not yet under the jurisdiction of the board because they are not counting hours, so they are not necessarily, and so we need to be careful with our wording in that nuance. But we should be as consistent as possible across trainees and social work interns. So that's A. 4980.48 B and C specify additional information that must be contained in a trainee's advertisement. Their name, their supervisor's license designation, and their supervisor's license number. So trainees are a little bit nuanced, and I would argue that instead of going into regs, I think this should stay into law, because the regulations don't contain any requirements for trainees. And the reason for that is that trainees are really not technically under the jurisdiction of our board yet. So we cannot necessarily take action against a trainee for advertising. If they're advertising incorrectly, because they're not registered with us, they're not technically under our authority. MFT trainees are a little bit different, though, because we do count pre-degree hours. So we are able to place in statute a little bit more requirements on them based on the fact that they are counting hours that are going toward licensure with the board. So I would recommend leaving any guidance in law about how trainees advertise in statute and in statute only. And I would recommend that we consider possibly streamlining the requirements of 4980.48 B and C, because they're a little bit duplicative of each other. Right now, they state that includes the trainee's name, the supervisor's license designation, and the license number, and the name of their employer, and that they're supervised. So the whole thing is sort of repetitive. So I recommend that we just sort of designate what we would like a trainee to state in their advertisement, and kind of streamline that language. So I guess there's two particular questions here. We need to figure out what we want to do for 4980.48A and what we want to do for 4980.48B and C.
I like the thought of streamlining. I think repetitiveness causes confusion.
I would recommend for A, kind of where I would suggest going for A, and you can let me know if you disagree, is that we streamline it to just say that for each trainee and intern, that they need to inform each client prior to performing any services that they are unlicensed and under supervision, period. Not licensed supervision, because it's not necessarily the case for social work interns and PCC trainees, that we just say, I'm unlicensed and under supervision, period. That's my recommendation for A.
Will removing the licensing cause us any domino effect on other things, because those hours do count? I'm just, for some reason, removing that word license supervision, because we know a MFT trainee does have to be under licensed supervision.
We could leave it just for the MFT trainees and just have that one slight difference.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there would be a domino effect of that, and it is providing more information. It's just like a little nuance, but I don't think it would trip up too many people when we're explaining the advertising. I'm trying to think if it makes not having the requirements exactly the same would trip up somebody to cause them to make an error in their advertising. And I'm thinking if we had an MFT trainee that said they're under supervision, we saw that, we would just let them know, hey, you need to say you're under licensed supervision. We wouldn't fine them the first time around or anything. So yeah,
so that would be intent of the reg versus letter of the reg then.
Right. It's more likely that people are going to be able to comply if it's as consistent as possible. But I think that for that small of a thing, we wouldn't take disciplinary action right off the bat on that. We would just have them correct the oversight.
And then just a comment, because I know things had to be written in certain ways, but the word trainee is used 17 times in one paragraph.
Yeah.
Roseanne, bring your magic and clean it up.
Yes, that's what I would like to do. So yeah, I would look at each of the sections and bring back language at the next meeting. And then we can go from there on, hopefully it wouldn't need to say trainee as many other times, but if for some reason it does, then we can talk about alternatives. But yeah, so what I'm hearing is we would clean all three up, just say unlicensed and under licensed supervision for MFTs, AMFTs, or MFT trainees, and just under supervision for interns and APCCs.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Okay.
And then for 4980.48B and C, I think rather than than the best way to kind of approach this, because there's some repetitive things in there, is just I will clean that up for the next meeting, and then you can take a look at what in detail, the detailed words that I struck out versus added, and we can decide if you're comfortable with that going forward and discuss it. Are you okay with that? I'm going to kind of just consolidate, rather than go into the nuances of how to consolidate it. I think I'll just consolidate it and then seek feedback if you're okay with that.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. All right, one more piece to discuss if there's no other discussion on that. Okay. So I want to talk about the last piece, which is how our advertising definition is portrayed in our law. And these are on the first page of attachment B. And so each particular practice act has a section that's defining advertising. And they're all pretty much substantially the same except for LPCC statute. LPCC statute does not define a public communication as defined in Business and Professions Code 651A, like the other three license types do. It's not, it's 651A still applies to them. So it's not problematic in the definition of the law and what the law does, but I think it's problematic in terms of not providing clarity that the definition of advertising and how it relates to 651A. So I think 499.12 for the LPCCs needs to look like the other three definitions of advertising. And I think that when we did the LPCC Practice Act back in 2012, it was modeled after the others, but there was a lot of different negotiations going on, and I think it just got written slightly different. I've reached out to CalPIC, and they don't seem, they're curious to see what the language would look like, but they don't seem to have a problem with it on the face. So I would like to go ahead and propose changing 499.12 to better match the other three practice acts in looping in that definition in 651 that applies to LPCCs because just by the fact that the definition of they are a healing arts licensee. So that is my recommendation for that. That's the final, so I'll open it up one final time for discussion and we can go from there.
I'm okay with you taking that and running with it, Roseanne. And it's good. Okay.
And I want to thank you and recognize you for making the effort to make gender neutral language consistent throughout all the stuff you're working on. It means a lot.
Good. Yeah, it's not something that had been really done in 2013. And so we try to, whenever we see that, when we touch statutes, we try to clean that up and fix that. And so that was one place that the section hasn't been touched in a while. So.
All right. Do we need a motion to have you do all this extra work?
No, I think we need to take public comment, but then I'll do the motion first. The motion would be to direct staff to make the discussed changes and bring back to the Policy and Advocacy Committee for further consideration and discussion.
All right, I so move. I have a second.
I'll second.
Perfect. All right, can we take some comments from the public?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on this agenda item, please either raise your hand or type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. And I see we have a request for comment from Ben Caldwell. Ben, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, yes. Thank you. Ben Caldwell, MFT. First of all, yeah, thank you, Roseanne. I know there's an awful lot that's here and there are layers of complexity to it, so appreciate your taking this on. As it relates to some of the initial impetus for these conversations, we talked back in the mid-2010s, I think, about tweets and Google ads and that kind of thing. And it was the opinion of the board at that time that if somebody's online tweet or Google ad or whatever didn't include direct contact information, but only linked to a website where all of the required disclosures were present, that they would, the board would treat the tweet or Google ad and the website sort of together as one ad. And it sounds like the direction that we're going, that same principle would be applied to TikTok and related sort of short video advertising. As long as somebody's not putting a phone number in there, if they link to a place that has all the required disclosures, that would seem to still be okay. I mean, ultimately, we're wanting to make sure folks are exposed to licensure information before they schedule an appointment. So I sort of wanted to confirm the philosophy of that. But Secondly, going back to the name piece, I know that you were wordsmithing that a bit. It seems like it would be helpful to include maybe just a little clause in there about so long as the nickname is not misleading. So like for me, then I'd be okay to advertise as Ben Caldwell, even though my name is Benjamin, as long as I have Benjamin Caldwell somewhere in that advertisement. It would be okay for me to say, I'm Ben Caldwell, but it wouldn't be okay for me to say I am John Sparky Sovak, for example. Because that would be misleading.
15 seconds.
And then just lastly, we got rid of the specific supervisor information a while back because people's supervisors turn over a lot, and let's stay in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
All right, the next comment is from Kathy Atkins. Kathy, you should be able to unmute.
Kathy Atkins from Camped. Thank you for reviewing this all. I have to admit, I'm like my tracking is a little bit off on the specific as to what amendments ended up being suggested. So I look forward to seeing what comes out with the next round as to specifics, but I would generally agree and appreciate the philosophy of sort of less is more to allow for flexibility, especially in today's day where the advertising isn't, the 1990s advertising, but what's in an email or what's in a tweet or what's out there and the necessity to have overkill. I appreciate the board's and committee's recognition of how we need to advertise in today's modern world. So thank you for that. And I look forward to seeing what's amended in the next go around. So thank you.
Thank you, Kathy.
And this is a moderator. I see no further requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you, moderator.
You're welcome.
Are there further comments from our board? Committee?
I have a further clarification I'd like to ask post to legal counsel, actually, based on Ben's comment. I guess my question for Christy, if we were to say for the going back to the name in attachment A for the advertising 1811 regs, if we were to add at the end of that, the full name is what is as included in the advertisement, so long as it's not misleading. If we were to do that change, is that something that OAL misleading is kind of a subjective term?
It's capable of multiple interpretations, and so I don't think that would be defensible to put that in there, because what we consider misleading or not is open to debate. But I think that the misleading aspect is addressed by them putting in their true legal name and associating it with the nickname. So we might want to work on saying that the nickname has to be associated directly with their true legal name in the advertisement somehow. And we'll have to work on that. But what takes it out of being misleading is the fact that they are required to disclose their true legal name as filed with the board. Right? So I don't think you need to put so as to not be misleading. I think what he might be getting at is he's suggesting the nickname should be derivative of their true name. I don't know if the board wants to consider limiting the kind of nickname you can use. It might get into a First Amendment issue because you've balanced it out by requiring the link between the nickname and the true name, so that takes it out of being misleading. We've got to be careful about how regulatory we get on First Amendment issues, because we tend to lose those cases in court. And so unless we have strong legal arguments for why we're being prescriptive as to how people advertise, false and misleading is our strongest legal argument, and the courts have recognized our ability to curtail First Amendment speech on false and misleading grounds. But if we go farther than that, we've got to be careful. So I would say that as long as the nickname is associated with their name as filed with the board, and they have their license number and all that is required by the law in 651 of the Business and Professions Code, that I think your regulation's defensible. as written, but I will open it up to the committee to determine if they want to further revise the proposal in any way. But we can work on the association piece if that's something that the committee is interested in.
Thoughts from the committee?
Roseanne, I think I'd like to see the draft of where you're going at our next meeting and then look at this a little bit deeper by then, because I think it might give everyone a chance to think more about it. Because when I hear this, what I realize is I couldn't be John Sparky Sovek because Sparky has nothing to do with my actual legal name. So, where are the things that would be used in advertising? Like if I was known as Sparky in the community, in the world, and I had to put John Sovek down because Sparky had nothing to do with my legal name, then I would lose a way to maybe be seen and recognized by my community in the advertising. And then at the same time, Sparky is still going to be listed in my thing on Breeze. If someone wants to look up my license number, they're going to know what my full legal name is. So I just think let's look at the language as we're looking at drafting it, and then maybe have time to look into some of those deeper pieces.
Okay, that sounds good. I like that.
I think that makes sense too. All right.
And then Kathy was unsure. Do you want me to summarize what I'm kind of going to go forward with? Because Kathy had kind of mentioned she wasn't sure of all the changes. It was a lot. So I think I'll just quickly summarize. So for the advertising regulations, we're going to work on the changes shown there are all hold, but we're going to make some amendments to the use of the nickname piece as we discussed. For 4980.44, we are going to beef up the ASW and APCC law to look a little bit more like 4980.44A. For 4980.44B, we're going to move the one piece that isn't overlapped in the advertising regulations into the advertising regs about being supervised by a licensed professional. And then for trainees, we are going to we're going to make the trainee requirements conform more to just say unlicensed and under supervision. And we're just going to, for B and C, we're going to consolidate those because they repeat a little bit and look at language. So, and then for 4999.12, we're going to make that advertising definition more consistent. So those are the changes that I'm going to clean up. Hopefully that makes sense. It's just a lot. I think it'll make more sense when you see it. But we're basically trying to make the advertising law consistent across all of the practice acts and have things that belong in regs or that are repeated either go away or moved into regs if we can.
That sounds great, Roseanne. That is a mountain to climb for you. So. All right, are we ready for a vote?
Actually, I have a quick question here. Based on the last comment John made, it sounds like after the changes are made and we get a new draft, it's coming back to committee again?
Yes.
Okay, so it looks like we're going to need to amend the motion because the motion states that we're bringing it to the board for a legislative proposal. So if we can get an amended motion.
No, it's not ready to go to board yet.
Well, I thought, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Roseanne.
The motion is make discuss changes and bring back to P&A for further consideration and discussion. So do we need to redo that?
Is that okay, Christina?
Who would like to move that?
I think that was already moved, right?
I thought it was moved to go to the board. Was I? No,
it was moved to have Roseanne work on it and come back to committee with it.
Okay.
That's what I think.
Apologies.
Okay.
All right, I'll take the vote. Chris Jones?
Yes.
John Sovek?
Yes.
Wendy Strack?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you. Next item on the agenda is the discussion and possible recommendation regarding clarifying the term supervisee. Christy, would you provide us with an overview?
It's actually Roseanne again.
Oh, is it? Oh, sorry.
Yes, you're stuck with me until the very end. Sorry.
That's okay.
So in terms of the next item, we're going to talk about clarifying the term supervisee in a couple of different places. I'm gonna like I did with the other. This particular discussion item is divided into two parts. Just to avoid confusion, I'm going to stop after the first part and then we'll continue. So there's a couple of different areas in the Practice Acts. Well, actually, throughout the Practice Acts, we refer to the term supervisee, but we don't define it. In most instances, the definition is not really needed. In the context that it's used, it can reasonably be inferred to mean an individual required by the board to be under supervision. An individual might be required to be under the board, required by the board to be under supervision for a number of different reasons. One most common one, probably they're an associate and they're gaining hours toward licensure. So they are by definition a supervisee. They also might be working in a non-exempt setting. Maybe they're not gaining hours, but they're working in a non-exempt setting, so they need to be registered to practice legally. That's another reason. They might be working under the 90-day rule, and so they're required to be under supervision. Or they might be an MFT trainee counting hours toward licensure, so they're required to be under supervision. So those are some of the various reasons why somebody might be a supervisee. But there's two instances where other kind of outside factors come in and the intended definition becomes unclear. And the first case is in the definition of direct supervisor conduct. And then there's these three sections of law one in each Practice Act that define individual supervision, triadic supervision, and group supervision for purposes of direct supervisor contact, which is required when gaining supervised experience toward licensure. So a question here arises because it refers to group supervision as consisting of one supervisor and no more than 8 supervisees. So the law does not address whether individuals receiving supervision who are not required to be under the board for supervision count as members of the group. And we had this question come up and the law does not address it. The regular definition of somebody required under the board to be under supervision doesn't come into play here. So we had the question of whether a licensee in a group supervision that was being required by their employer to be part of the group and have supervision to, let's say, hone their skills, whether that person counts as one of the 8 or not. So they're participating in the group clinical supervision. They're taking a spot, but they don't fit the definition of a supervisee. However, if you think about the reason why we're limiting it to 8, they're taking a spot in the group. So they're getting attention from the supervisor, and that's likely the reason that the group was limited to 8, so that there's not too many people competing for the attention of the supervisor and that everybody's getting quality supervision. So in attachment A, we've proposed a solution to this issue. Instead of limiting the number of supervisees, it limits the number of, quote, persons receiving supervision for providing clinical mental health services. And so that would capture not only the board's associates and trainees and 90-day rule applicants, but it would also capture a person that is licensed, that's required to be under supervision, maybe by their employer. It would also capture a psychology pre-licensee who is not under the jurisdiction of this board, maybe participating in that group for supervision, or maybe somebody that's doing clinical work without a license or registration if it's a non-exempt setting. So it's capturing some things that are out so that definition is a little bit clearer. So that's the solution we're proposing for attachment A. So I'm going to stop here and we can discuss that particular piece before we move on.
So this is then just implementation of the language that was brought up at the board meeting to see how it would fit into all of this.
Yeah, we took it to the board, discussed it, and then we've honed it a little bit since then, especially more the second piece, but this piece is part of it too. So yeah, we're just bringing it back to the committee for a final sort of discussion, and then before we move forward. Chris, I think you're muted.
One of these days, I'm going to learn how to use online meeting platforms. I think it's fine. I do like the fact that it's going to better define the role of who is in that group, so that there's opportunity to make sure that we provide the correct supervision for our trainees.
And Roseanne, one thing I remember vaguely, wasn't there a concern from social workers about something in this, or is that in the second part?
I believe that was in the second part. They had a concern about having social work interns be included in group supervision, I believe it was. This doesn't require them to be, so social work interns they can already be in a group supervision. This doesn't dictate whether or not they can be included, but if they are included, then they have to be counted as one of the 8, basically. It would clarify. But I think they're concerned, and I'll let Rebecca, I think she's on, I'll let Rebecca, I think her comment pertained more to attachment B. Do you want me to move on before we and talk about, okay. So going on to attachment B, so there's a second question in the use of the term supervisee for a different section of law that again applies to each practice act. And these subsections require that supervisors of supervisees in non-exempt settings have no more than 6 individual or triadic supervisees at any one time. And in an exempt, this doesn't apply in exempt settings because in an exempt setting, there's no limit on the total number of supervisees per supervisor. So this particular subsection in question that states it's 6 people per supervisor, it goes on to state that supervisees may be associate marriage and family therapists, associate professional clinical counselors, or associate clinical social workers, or any combination of these. The reason for the limitation on number of supervisees is to ensure that a supervisor can dedicate enough time to properly supervise each one. However, it probably should not call out just associates. There's many different types of supervisees that are not associates that can be supervised, and they should all probably be included in the 6. And again, it's not saying that they can't be part of the 6 or they can be part of the 6. It's whether or not they should count if they are part of the 6. So we discussed this at our last meeting, and we just came to a solution that basically would clarify that supervisors in non-exempt settings are limited to a total of 6. Currently, it's not clear whether it's 6 per setting or 6 total. So we're trying to clarify that. And then we limit the supervisor to a total of 6 individuals who are receiving supervision for providing clinical mental health services. So instead of just capturing associates in that 6, this also captures other types of supervisees, such as trainees, social work interns, and 90-day rule applicants, and those being supervised as part of their training for other professions. Again, it's not bringing in social work interns or anybody else saying that they can or can't supervise them. It's just saying if they are, that counts as one of their 6, so that they can do a good job supervising each one. And so that's what's up for discussion today. Somebody did bring up the point whether we would want to delay implementation or not. I think that's a good point to question. I don't see any. I mean, if this were really reaching, if we decided to run this and if it came into law, the governor would have to sign it by September of 2024. So there would be, it would go into effect in January. So there would be a 3-month lead time. I don't know that I would agree with wanting to do any further delayed implementation, just because it's going to go into effect at some point. And so I don't know that giving a large amount of time is beneficial, but somebody might disagree and be able to make a case. So I threw that in there just for discussion. And we did discuss this at the last P&A committee and then at the board meeting. And so we're just bringing it back to kind of close the loop with the latest language. And then we can go from there. So I'll open it up.
Roseanne, I guess if I recall the conversation on this particular topic before, there was some concern expressed by NASW about the shortage of supervisors for social work interns and a concern that a change here, and maybe I'm conflating two issues, but I think it was here that capturing them in this definition would make it harder for them to find supervisors. And I'm just wondering if I'm remembering that issue correctly, and then if we've had conversations with the association about that matter.
Yeah, and I'll let them speak. We did have that conversation. I think that we had kind of decided we didn't want to carve them out. So it's basically clarifying that they count as one of the 6. In most cases, I believe social work interns are going to be working in an exempt setting where they wouldn't count anyways. This would only be if they were working in a non-exempt setting, where they would have to, it's not saying that they have to be, but if they are, then they do count as one of the group. And again, it's kind of a public protection issue, weighing the quality supervision if they count as one of the 6 versus not. It's not forcing them to be supervised by a licensed person. They don't necessarily have to be under the eyes of the board, but if they are, then they would count as one of the 6. So I'll let Rebecca, hopefully she's still on, I'll let her weigh in on how she's currently feeling about that. But yes, we did touch base after the last meeting to discuss.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I was muted again. Yeah, it must be Friday afternoon. Were there any other comments from our committee? Do we need a motion for this to move forward with the language?
So yeah, the motion would be to direct staff to discuss changes and any non-substantive changes and bring back to the board for consideration as a legislative proposal.
So then you'd be bringing the language would go back to the board, not to the committee before we?
Yes, for final approval, yes. We made some other changes after the last meeting, so we brought it back, but then it would need to go to board in November for final approval.
Okay, perfect. Then I so move. Have a second?
I'll second.
Moderator, would you please open the discussion for a public discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on this agenda item, please either raise your hand or type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. We are displaying instructions, and I do see that Rebecca Gonzalez is requesting to comment. So Rebecca, you should be able to unmute.
Thank you, Rebecca Gonzalez with the National Association of Social Workers California chapter. Want to thank the committee for this discussion, and I also want to thank committee members for remembering that we had some concerns here. I think the concerns were more with ASWs being able to find supervisors, but I do think after conversations with Roseanne and a few tweaks in the language and what the true intent is, that we feel comfortable with the proposal as it is currently written. Thank you.
All right, and next we have a request for comment from Ben Caldwell. Ben, you should be able to unmute.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ben Caldwell, and thank you, Roseanne and committee members, for this discussion. Specifically on the second part here, that limit of 6 in private practice and non-exempt settings. I did hear from folks expressing concern about the folks they might be working with in a certification process. Like if I wanted to get certified in EFT or in certain other forms of treatment, some of those certification processes require what they would consider to be supervision, but what the board might consider to be more of consultation. And it does appear to fall under the language as it is presented right now. And so I wondered about the possibility to address that concern of where it says individuals who are receiving supervision for providing clinical mental health services in a non-exempt setting. if that could just be changed to unlicensed individuals who are receiving supervision, et cetera, et cetera. And that way, that kind of consultation for the purposes of certification that is sometimes done with licensed folks in a more advanced process wouldn't be inadvertently captured here. Thank you.
Next, Kathy Atkins, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, Kathy Atkins with CAMPT. Thank you for bringing this back for discussion. And given there's not really a perfect way to write these up that hits everybody at the same time, doesn't confuse the intent. Generally, CAMPT is fine with the drafted amendments as presented here today and what has been written as well as outlined. So thank you, and CAMPT is fine with what's been presented. Thank you.
All right, I see no further requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you, moderator.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other comments from the board, from the committee? All right, Christina, would you take the vote?
Wait, hold on.
Oh,
I have a question I'd like to open back up for discussion regarding Ben's comment. So he suggested with attachment B that language that says turn to it. He would like to say it means contact between one supervisor and unlicensed persons receiving supervision for providing clinical mental health services. I don't necessarily, I can see his point in doing that. My only concern, well, I have a couple of concerns with that. Number one is in the first part for the other sections in attachment A, we're specifically including unlicensed. We are specifically trying to include licensed persons. That was the whole sort of intent of the question and why we started doing this. So I wouldn't want to do that for A, but I'd be okay with doing it for B. However, in the context, we have to be careful with the use of the term unlicensed because Business and Professions Code 23.8 defines a licensed person as a licensee or a registrant. So I don't know exactly how we would write that any clearer.
Roseanne?
I think it's, yeah.
But just a thought on where you're clarifying here as well. If I look at what we're talking about, we are clarifying the term supervisee, okay?
Yes.
So I believe that Ben's question, although, has some points to it, doesn't necessarily apply to what we're specifically trying to do here.
Okay.
Because a person who's getting CEUs and certification is not landing under this specific set of rules and regs that we're looking at right now. They are already potentially a licensed person. And if they were a person who was still a registrant or an intern going through these types of certifications, that type of supervision probably would not be counting towards hours in certain ways. So I think we're trying to like catch on to something that doesn't necessarily fit into the definition of what we're trying to do with this particular languaging.
Okay. So you'd like to leave it as is, as proposed. Okay.
I would.
Okay.
Okay.
Christina?
Yes. Chris Jones,
Yes.
John Sovik,
Yes.
Wendy Stratt,
Yes.
motion carries.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the discussion and possible recommendation regarding proposed amendments to the Business and Professions Code, amend BPC 4980.54, acceptable sources of continuing education for licensed marriage and family therapists. Roseanne?
Yes. Thanks, Chris. So every year we review our board statutes to determine if there is any technical, minor, or non-substantive amendments that are needed. And if we find that there are, then they are usually placed in an omnibus bill that the legislature via the Senate Business and Professions Committee runs each year. So this year we've only identified one amendment that's technical in nature that we may wish to consider for inclusion in the omnibus bill. And that's Business and Professions Code section 4980.54F. So this particular section specifies continuing education requirements for LMFTs. It states that continuing education must be obtained from either a CE provider accepted by the board as specified in regulations, or from an accredited or school or state approved school that meets the requirements in Business and Professions Code 4980.36 or 4980.37. Those particular two code sections that are referenced are very long code sections that contain all of the requirements that need to happen for a degree to qualify for LMFT licensure. So while using BPC 4980.36 and 4980.37 in that reference, those sections do reference that an accrediting or approval is required when the board is accepting a degree, but they're also referencing that a degree needs to contain a lot of other things. And so it sort of implies that for CE courses, when we reference these sections in their entirety, it implies that any CE from a school must not only be from an accredited or approved institution, but also one that offers a qualifying LMFT degree. And really, I think the intent is that just the CE needs to be from an accredited or approved school, not actually from a qualifying LMFT degree. So we would like to change that definition a little bit to match more what's done in LPCC and LCSW law. And so what we propose is that Business and Professions Code 4980.03 specifically define accredited and approved schools for the purposes of the LMFT Practice Act. And so referencing that particular section rather than the Business and Code education, the BPC education requirements for an MFT qualifying degree clarifies the intent that CE courses must be from a school that is accredited or approved, but not necessarily from one that has a qualifying LMFT degree program, as the law currently implies. And this is in line for what's already in law for LCSWs and for LPCCs, where they just reference the definition of the accredited or approved school. And so we are recommending making that change to 4980.54F. So I will open it up for discussion.
Committee members?
Roseanne, I'm just disappointed you only found one thing for the omnibus bill. Come on.
I know, right? We'll have more probably stuff later, but we've done a lot of the cleanup, so it's now just big issues to tackle.
Okay, if there's no discussion, do we need a motion to have you clean that up?
So yeah, the motion would be to direct staff to make any non-substantive changes and bring to the board for consideration as a legislative proposal.
I so move.
Thanks, Sparky. I will second. All right, any further discussion? We open it up to the public.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on this agenda item, please either raise your hand or type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. We'll give you a moment.
We lose the moderator?
Nope, I was just waiting to see if we had any comment, and I don't see any requests. So shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. No further discussion from the committee? Perfect. Christina?
Yes. Chris Jones?
Yes.
John Silva?
Yes.
Wendy Strapp?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you, Christina. Next item on the agenda is update on the board sponsored and board motioned legislation. Roseanne?
Yeah, we have a lot to report here. So the governor, as of October 14th, finished signing all bills that made it to his desk. So we have some news on bills that the board had taken positions on. Our board-sponsored bill, AB 232, which was the temporary practice allowance for those qualifying licensees licensed in another state to have a 30 consecutive day temporary practice allowance, was signed by the governor. So that will go into effect January 1st. And staff is currently working to implement that, do an FAQ, and kind of get that up and running in time for January 1st. So that is good news. Our omnibus bill, SB 887, was also signed by the governor. AB 665, which was a bill to make the requirements for a minor to consent to mental health treatment equal for both Medi-Cal recipients and non-Medi-Cal recipients, was signed by the governor as well, as was SB 372. That was a bill that requires DCA boards to keep, if somebody changed their legal name or gender due to conform with their gender identity or due to certain circumstances of domestic violence, that the board would, upon their request, keep that former name confidential. That bill was also signed by the governor. SB 373 was vetoed by the governor. That bill would have prohibited the board from disclosing the full address of licensees on the internet website. I've included a link to the veto message in your packet if you're interested in seeing that. SB 143 was signed. That bill conforms state statutes with a new federal law enabling the portability of professional license for military members if they're on orders here, or military spouses if their spouse is on order here. And it also extends previously expired exemptions of Bagley-Keene until December 31st of this year. That was signed by the governor. SB 525, which would implement a minimum wage for healthcare workers. That was a controversial bill this year, and that was signed by the governor. And then finally, SB 544 basically modernizes the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act to allow new options for remote participation moving forward. That bill was signed by the governor and becomes effective on January 1st. So you can look for some new Bagley-Keene requirements going forward from January 1st. So that's the legislative update if you have any questions.
Oh, I think we're good. Thank you, Roseanne. Next item up for, I apologize. Do I need to move to public comment for the legislative update? Can't recall. No? All right.
No, I don't believe you do. It's just a report. So.
I'm sorry, Steve?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's just a report and an update, so you don't need to if you don't want.
Perfect. Okay. That's what I thought. I couldn't recall. All right. So next on the agenda is update on board rulemaking proposals. Christy, can you provide us with an update?
Yes, hi there. Just a quick update on our regulations that these are two that the board approved at the last meeting. So the unprofessional conduct regulations have been submitted to the Department of Consumer Affairs for the initial review process. So there's the legal regulation unit is currently reviewing that package. It also goes through budgets, things like that. And then it'll come back to us at the board and go through, it will be noticed to the public at that point, once it's approved through the department. And then we'll start the actual regulation process. So there's an attachment that kind of shows how that works. The disciplinary guidelines were also approved, and I'm working to prepare that for the initial review process. It's taking quite a while because it's a large regulation package. So we'll keep you posted on how that progresses. And that's all I have.
All right. Well, thank you, Christy. That was great. Next on our agenda is item number 10, suggestion for future agenda items. Do any committee members have additional agenda items for future meeting? No? Okay. Moderator, would you open up the Q&A for audience to participate in ideas for future agenda items?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on future agenda items, you may either raise your hand or type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you, moderator.
You're welcome.
And next item on the agenda is public comment for items that are not on the agenda. As a reminder, the board may not discuss or take action on any matter raised during this public comment section, except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. Do any of our committee members have comments or items that are not on the agenda? Okay. And moderator, would you open up the panel for audience members to have comments that are not on the agenda?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment, please either raise your hand or type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. We'll give you a moment. All right, I see no request for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you, moderator.
You're welcome.
And our final item is adjournment. Thank you everyone for participating today. As a reminder, our next board meeting will be on November 16th and 17th in Sacramento. We hope to see you then. Meeting is adjourned. The time is 1:44 p.m. Everybody have a great weekend. Thank you for being here.